Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Jasodhanandana Brajajana Rajana Jasodhanandana Brajajana Rajana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Hare Krishna. Let's see. Today we'll be reading from Canto 10 of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, chapter 42, verses 22 through 24, but presumably 22 is on the board. So we'll be reading that. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, as mentioned before, we're reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 10, chapter 42, verses 22 through 24, but we'll be reading from 22 and I'll read the rest. Tayosta adbhutam viram Nishamya pura vashinaha Teja pragapyam rupam cha minire vibhudottamano tayostad adbhutam viryam nishamya pura vashinaha teja pragadyam rupam cha minare vibhudottamano tayostad adbhutam viryam nishamya pura vashinaha teja pragadyam rupam cha menire vibhudottamo. Okay. Hare Krishna. All right, word for word. Tayohu. Of them. Tat. That. Adbhutam. Amazing. Viryam. Heroic deed. Nishamya. Sing. Puravashinaha. The residents of the city. Tejaha. Their strength. Pragalbyam. Boldness. Rupam. Beauty. Cha. And. Menire. They considered. Vibhuda. Of demigods. Uttamao. Two of the best. All right, translation by the disciples of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Ki Jai. No purport. Translation. Having witnessed the amazing deed Krishna and Balaram had performed, and seeing their strength, boldness, and beauty, the people of the city thought they must be two prominent demigods. Okay, text 23. Tayor vicharata swaram adityo astam upe ivan Krishna chama vrito gopau purat shadaktum iyatum. Translation. As they strolled about at will, the sun began to set, so they left the city with the cowherd boys and returned to the cowherds' wagon encampment. Ooh, this next verse is pretty long. I think I'll skip it. I can't see it though. I'll read the translation. Yeah, so I'll just read the translation for 24. Translation. At the time of Mukunda's, Krishna's departure from Vrindavan, the gopis had foretold that the residents of Mathura would enjoy many benedictions. And now the gopis' predictions were coming true, for these residents were gazing upon the beauty of Krishna, the jewel among men, Indeed, the goddess of fortune desired the shelter of that beauty, so much that she abandoned many other men, although they worship her. Amagyantamanandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Shakshu Umiletamnena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitanyena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavinebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhattabinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai. Thank you everyone for coming. First and foremost, I would like to offer my gratitude to, first of all, the devotees who have come today. And as mentioned before, as mentioned always, there's many people who have contributed to the development of my Krishna consciousness, too many to mention. If circumstances permit, I'll mention them during the class, throughout each class I give. But first and foremost, I'd like to offer my gratitude to my mother and my brother, His Grace Jai Jagannath Prabhu. So today's series of verses, basically, last week, of course, I appreciate the kind comments, but it was like a silent film era. There was video, but nobody could see, so I really didn't do another class this week. I didn't take notes, so basically, it's going to be the same class as last week. I could tweak it a little bit, but pretty much, I thought these were some important points, and some of my family and friends can't make it here, so they watch online. So pretty much it's going to be the same class. So for the devotees who are here, thank you, but this is going to be a rerun. So today's verse, I'll mention the last verse of verse 24. It says, at the time of Mukunda Krishna's departure from Vrindavan, the gopis have foretold that the residents of Mathura will enjoy many benedictions. Now, so what were those benedictions that the residents of Mathura enjoyed? Well, last week we discussed the benediction that Trivakra, or Cubja, the hunchback woman, received from Krishna. And so, I'm pretty sure this verse mentioned Kamsa. So anyway, the benediction that Trivakra, or Cubja, received was that she was healed by Krishna when she tried to connect to Krishna. So last week's verse we discussed that that because Cubja pleased the Lord, that with her bhakti, that the Lord healed her of her hunchback. Now, basically the essence of last week's class, I believe it was verse 6 and 7, that was basically the verse that Cubja pleased the Lord, so the Lord healed her of her hunchback. Now, basically the essence of last week's class and what we'll be discussing today, and normally the type of classes I like to give is like to compare and contrast the protagonists in our scriptures versus the antagonists. So let's describe the difference between Cubja and Kamsa. So, what's the difference? The difference is, although Cubja was crippled on the outside, but because she was healthy on the inside, it led to her elevation. Now take Kamsa. Although he was healthy on the outside, but because he was crippled on the inside, it led to his degradation. Now, what was Kamsa crippled by? He was crippled by what we're all crippled by: lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, vengeance, and especially fear. When Kamsa heard the omen from the sky, Kamsa, the 8th son of Devaki, will kill you. So he became so fearful. And he became so fearful that he was going to even kill his own sister. And so Vasudev, he tried to talk some sense into him. He's like, Kamsa, we're all going to die sooner or later. So what difference does it make whether you die, now or later? We're all going to die. But because he was crippled by such fear that he was even willing to kill his own sister and even willing to kill all of her children. So this is a lesson we could take. The first lesson we could take is that when we're crippled by fear, we could perform so many demoniac activities to even our family, which to speak of our friends and other people we don't know. And so we see in the material world, there's a saying, it says, man may counterfeit money. In many more cases, money makes counterfeit men. So we see when we do everything just for money, we're willing to perform so many sinful activities. Just like sometimes people may fear their job. Oh, yes, if you don't perform this demoniac activity for me, if you work for a demoniac boss, then I will fire you. And we see people are even willing to, so basically, Krishna consciousness means to put faith in Krishna that nobody's my maintainer other than Krishna. And basically, this is the type of faith that we try to develop. And we develop this faith from what? Shreya Made Kona Shreya Jivada Hoysar Krishna Bhatta Sangha Vina Shreya Nahiyar. We develop this faith by associating with devotees. So this verse was spoken by Ramananda Roy. Lord Chaitanya asked Ramananda Roy, what is the most auspicious thing in the world? And so Ramananda Roy, he said, Krishna Bhatta Sangha Vina. The most auspicious thing is to associate with devotees, sincere devotees. Why? Because they instill that faith, that fearlessness. Bajahure mana shinandana andana abaya chadenana bindare. So unless we become fearless to some extent, of course we can't become fearless by our own, but by pleasing Krishna. Otherwise, we could see fear causes people to do so many sinful activities. So to the degree we associate with devotees, sincere devotees, and to the degree we won't have the faith that nobody's my maintainer other than Krishna. Now, as previously mentioned, last week's verse was specifically focused on Cubja, the hunchback woman. Now, there's a nice quote in this regard. So it says, normally I'll start off the class with a quote, but but it's relevant to the further discussion of this topic. So basically, there's a nice quote. There's an unknown author. It says, there is no footprint too small that it cannot leave an imprint on this world. I'll repeat that. There is no footprint too small that it cannot leave an imprint on this world. Now, although this particular pastime doesn't mention it, but I'm sure Cubja was always told by naysayers what she couldn't do. The naysayers probably told her this, my dear Cubja, hunchback woman, you will never leave an imprint on this world. Why? Because you're crippled. However, the lesson we learn from this particular pastime is this. People don't determine our destiny. Almighty God determines our destiny. Kali Kaleta Dharma, Krishna Nama Sankirtan, Krishna Shakti Vina, Nahe Tara Pravartana. Because Cubja, the hunchback woman, was given Krishna Shakti Vina, the empowerment of Krishna, she was no longer hunchback anymore. Now the question is this, why was Cubja given Krishna Shakti Vina, the empowerment of Krishna? Well, there's a nice verse that says, Atapum bir duija shrestar vanashram vibhagashaha swanutita dharmasya samsidir haritoshanam. So this is a famous verse from the first Canto, chapter 2, verse 13. It says the purpose of life is samsidir haritoshanam. And what does that mean? Samsidir means perfection. What's the perfection of our life? Haritoshanam. Toshanam means to please, and Hari means the Lord. Now, the word Hari is another name for Krishna, and it means he who removes our obstacles to spiritual progress. Now, or any obstacle that's holding us back in this material world. And so we see that because Cubja, she pleased the Lord, he removed her obstacle. And what was that obstacle? Her crippleness, her hunchback. And so this is a lesson we can take, that to the degree we please the Lord, then to that degree, He will remove any obstacles that is holding us back. Not materially speaking necessarily, but especially spiritually speaking. Because sometimes when, obviously, Jama Aishaya Shuta Shibir Edamana Madupuma Naivahati Abidatumvai Twama Kinchana Gochana Queen Kunti says, generally speaking, when we're blessed with material benedictions, they kind of make us crippled, spiritually crippled. So sometimes the Lord, he may not remove our, you could say, material obstacles or obstacles that are preventing us from enjoying materially, but he will certainly remove our any obstacles that is preventing us from growing spiritually. And so Cubja pleased the Lord in this way. Now, it is often seen throughout all universal spiritual teachings and throughout the history of mankind that sometimes when these great leaders, saints, yogis, babas, when they please the Lord, what's the result? Sometimes they displease others. But there's a nice quote that says, if you please God, it does not matter whom you displease. And if you displease him, it does not matter whom you please. And so we see in this way that because Prahlad Maharaj pleased the Lord, it did not matter that he displeased Hiranyakashipu. On the other hand, because Hiranyakashipu displeased the Lord, it did not matter that he pleased the demigod Brahma. And so this is a lesson we could take in our life, is that sometimes we may have to make decisions that displease others. But if we're sincere in our conscience, if we have no material motives, nothing can be displeasing for a devotee. The only, displeasure that may come if we have material motives, and if our material motives are not fulfilled, sometimes people become displeased. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he has something to say in this regard about when we please the Lord, sometimes we may displease others. So he had a lot to say to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. He displeased a lot of people. But why? Well, why did he displease them? Because they had material motives. And he was an obstruction to the material motives. And so he says in this regard, so there's a nice article that says, the article is entitled, The Acharya's Unequaled and Unsurpassed Greatness. So this article is reproduced in the Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhav, Volume 3, Chapter 7, page 54 through 56. So let's hear what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says in this regard of pleasing the Lord that may lead to displeasing others. He says, quote, even if hundreds and hundreds of people, or even if all the godless people of the innumerable universes assemble in one voice and shout at me, I will accept it and loudly declare the actual truth. Although Prahlad was a Nitya Siddha devotee of Lord Vishnu, as long as he did not take the position of a preacher, he was the center of the eyes of the king of demons, Hiranyakashipu, and of the whole society of demons, like a garland on their neck, or the treasure of their heart, and was the object of their regard, care, affection, parental inclination, and glorification. But from the very day he began to boldly preach the truth to the king of demons, namely, one pointed Vishnu Bhakti, the foregoing of family-based dharma, to accept the necessity of Hari Bhajan, the uselessness of materialistic family gurus in service to Paramahamsas, and began to preach to his classmates the need to renounce the association of family-based demons and to accept Hari Bhajan. From that day forth, the number of his enemies steadily increased. For even in Satya Yuga, when Dharma stood on four legs, a father did not hesitate to act as an enemy toward his son, who was a preacher of the truth. Even the naturally affectionate heart of a father became filled with malice for his truth-preaching son. How glorious is Lord Vishnu's illusory energy, which makes the impossible possible. The jivas are so totally averse to Vishnu, as if having taken a vow to remain averse to him, that they would not hear discussion of the truth or of the essential characteristics of Krishna, nor of an assessment of their own perverted nature. When examples of disregard for the truth and of malice toward preachers of the truth were seen even in Satya Yuga, then in this age of Kali, quarrel and hypocrisy, is it astonishing to see both a prevailing indifference to the truth and a combined effort to thwart the acharyas engaged in spreading truth? End quote. And so, throughout this article, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta mentions the word truth about at least a dozen times. I didn't count, but we could hear it. So he reminds me of a nice quote. It says, truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose, it will defend itself. So, this quote is very pertinent to the pastime of Lord Narasimha. So what happened in that pastime? Prahlad, he told Hiranyakashipu, my dear father, Lord Vishnu, he is everywhere, including your heart. So Hiranyakashipu, he became angry. He said, where's Vishnu? Is he in the wall? Is he in the ceiling? Is he in a pillar? And so Prahlad says, my dear father, like I said, he's everywhere, including the pillar. So Hiranyakashipu became so angry. Why? Because without going into details of this pastime, Prahlad told Hiranyakashipu, he says, my dear father, you are not the center of the universe. Lord Krishna is. And so this is a lesson we could take. Sometimes when people don't treat us like the center of the universe, what do? We act like Hiranyakashipu. We become so enraged, so angry, that we're willing to commit harm to ourselves and potentially to others. So there's a saying, when they discover the center of the universe, a lot of people pointed to discover that they are not it. And so this is precisely what happened to Hiranyakashipu. So in order to maintain the promise of Prahlad Maharaj, that the Lord is everywhere, including the pillar. So it's described that when Hiranyakashipu became so angry, he broke the pillar in his palace, and outside the pillar, Lord Narasimha. Anyway, sorry about that. I'm not a good storyteller, but I'm trying my best. So outside the pillar, Lord Narasimha came, and in this way, the absolute truth, he didn't need anyone to defend him. He had the Shakti to defend himself. So this is pertinent to this quote. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose, it will defend itself. And so this is particularly relevant to this particular subject matter. Now, as far as this subject matter of truth is, the truth about this particular subject of Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad, well, the truth is that we could see in this particular pastime that although Hiranyakashipu had the body of an adult, he obviously had the mind of a child. Why? Because he was proud, he was envious, he was vengeful, and he always told others what they couldn't do. On the other hand, although Prahlad Maharaj had the body of a child, he obviously had the mind of an adult. Why? Because he was humble, he was appreciative, he was forgiving, and he always told others what they could do. So this is stated in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. So this is precisely stated in the 7th Canto, chapter 10, verse 28. It says, although Prahlad Maharaj, although he's only a child, nevertheless, he's still considered a great Mahabhagavat. And what does that mean? That means he's a spiritual prodigy. And so this is a lesson, and this is a universal spiritual teachings that's described throughout all the scriptures of the world. So, for example, Lord Buddha says, he says a nice quote. He says, a man is not an elder merely because his head is gray. His age may be ripe, but he is called old in vain. He in whom there's truth, virtue, love, restraint, moderation, he who is free from impurity and is wise, he is called an elder. And so, even in the Bible, when Jesus was 12 years old, one day him and his family came to the temple for whatever particular festival it was. So after the festival was crowded, Jesus left with his family, or so his family thought so. So it's described that just like, any festival day, it's so crowded, sometimes you don't know where your kids are. And so it's described that when Jesus' family left this festival, they assumed he was following his mother and father assumed that he was following right behind, but he stayed behind to preach, you could say, God consciousness to the priests. Why? Because even as a 12-year-old, we see, even Prahlad Maharaj says, he's like, even though I'm 5 years old, I could see that, basically my classmates are simply wasting their time just, playing around recess. And even adults, they play around recess. So what to speak of children? They have their own adult, recess. So Prahlad, great souls like Prahlad Maharaj, the Lord Jesus Christ, so it's described the Lord Jesus Christ, he had no interest in playthings. He had interest in connecting people to God. Shushusho Shraddha Danasa Vasudeva Kataruchi Sanyama Hasevaya Vipa Punya Tirthani Shevana. He had such ruchi, taste for describing the glories of the Lord, that when he was at this festival, he had no inclination to leave, but to describe the glories of the Lord. And all the townspeople were wondering, who is this spiritual prodigy? He is so enlightened. So this is a universal spiritual teaching that one is not considered an elder by your age, but by your choices in life. I mean, are we considered the politicians who pocket the money and exploit others? Are they considered elders? No, they're not. And so Prabhupada, he has something in this regard to say, because this is a universal spiritual teaching, and Prabhupada elaborates on it regarding some pastimes in the Bhagavatam. So, in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 6, chapter 7, verse 33, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, quote, "It is said that one may be senior without being advanced in age. Even if one is not old, one gains seniority if he is senior in knowledge." So Prabhupada, in this particular quote, Prabhupada is referring to the pastime where Indra, the king of heaven, because he was so intoxicated by, you could say, subscribers, followers, views, his retweets, because he was so bewildered by social media, I'm making it more relevant, obviously. One day, all the members of the demigods started to glorify Indra, and he became so intoxicated by his so-called, glory, his so-called wisdom, knowledge. There's a saying, it says, if one candle lights another candle and can illuminate thousands of other candles. So one heart illuminates another heart and can illuminate thousands of other hearts. So basically the lesson is that whatever knowledge we receive in life is coming from others. So, what do we have to be proud of? Without our parents even giving us a language, we'll just be speaking gibberish all the time. So how can we be proud? Similarly, if our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, didn't translate these books, the only thing we could do is remember them and basically, essentially, meet myself too. I'm just quoting them like a parrot. So we have nothing to be proud of. And so in this way, Indra, he was proud that all the members of the universe was glorifying him. And while all the members of the universe was glorifying Indra, his spiritual master, Brihaspati, walked in. And he noticed his spiritual master, but then he completely ignored them, neglected them, because he was so intoxicated by their praise. So this is a lesson we can take in our life. Sometimes when we become so intoxicated by, especially in this, obviously social media age, that we neglect to be grateful for not just our spiritual master, but so many people who have contributed to our Christian consciousness. And we think we're the Buddha, the enlightened one. And so yes, in the material world, we all get some honor, we all get some dishonor. But the reality is that we deserve more dishonor than honor, because what do we know? We don't know anything. We're just plagiarizing. Prabhupada translated these books, and we're just plagiarizing like we have wisdom. So there's nothing to be proud of. And so in this way, because Indra committed this guru aparad, not being grateful to his guru, that it's described that the demigods, Brihaspati, he renounced, Brihaspati was the priest of the demigods, and because of this guru aparad, he gave up being a priest. So it's described that they were looking for another priest, and so they appointed Vishvarupa. Now Vishvarupa, he's the nephew of the demigods, which means that Vishvarupa is their junior, the demigod's junior. And so Indra approached Vishwarupa, and he says, my dear Vishwarupa, I committed a grave mistake. I was so intoxicated by, fame and followers that I neglected my guru. So, and he was a priest of the demigods. So now we need another priest, so that the demigods won't lose their battle against the demons. And so they appointed Vishwarupa. So it's described that Vishwarupa, he was reluctant to accept it because he was junior to the demigods. The demigods were senior. But Indra says, wisdom isn't determined by age, but it's determined by one's choices in life. We know your spiritual practices. We know your sincerity. So, yes, you can become our priest. And so in this way, Prabhupada quotes this verse regarding Vishwarupa, what I previously mentioned, described in the 6th Canto, chapter 7, 33. So Prabhupada quotes regarding Vishwarupa. It says, quote, it is said that one may be senior without being advanced in age. Even if one is not old, one gains seniority if he is senior in knowledge. So because Vishwarupa was senior in knowledge, he became a priest of the demigods. Now there's many things you could, since we have a little bit more time since Kartik is over. Now we could define the word Vishwarupa. Vishva means universe or universal, and Rupa, as this verse described, means beauty in this particular verse we have today. So we see that what makes a person beautiful is not their external beauty, because what happens if you get in a car accident, if you get a disease, where's your beauty go? It's over. And we're not the owners of our beauty. Just like in one night's lecture by His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj, when he was given sannyas initiation to Amala Bhakta Prabhu, who's now Amala Bhakta Maharaj. So you could look it up on YouTube. So in that lecture, His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj says a nice quote. He says, Srila Prabhupada was once asked by a devotee for permission to renounce everything. Srila Prabhupada's response was, Krishna owns everything. So what do you have to renounce? The only thing you have to renounce is the misconception that you have something to renounce. So we hear that Krishna owns everything. Bhotaram yagyatapasam sarvaloka maheshwanam suhridam sarvabhutanam gyatwamam shantarichati sarvaloka maheshwanam. Krishna is the owner of everything. If we were the owner of anything, that means it can never be taken away from us. But since everything is taken away from us, then how can we claim ownership? When we die, we may say I'm the owner of a business, but when we die, when we're in the grave, 6 feet under, can you say I'm the owner? No, somebody else is going to be the owner. So actually nothing is owned by us. Everything is owned by Krishna. Same with all the 6 opulence of Krishna. Riches, which we just described in this quote by His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj. So what are the 6 opulence of Krishna? Riches, fame, strength, knowledge, renunciation, and beauty. Rupam. We're not even the owners of our beauty. Why? Because it can be taken away from us. It will be taken away from us at any moment. So how can we say we own it? We do not own it. And so I was describing to a couple of devotees, and I'll mention this since we have more time now, looking at the time. So I asked Mother Krishna Archana Mataji after last week's class, I said, do you want to hear something very profound? And also, recently, I think I told the twins, Shamasaki and Shamagopi, and they all agreed that whatever I told them was so profound. Now, naturally, I don't like to quote devotees unless I have a particular reference. Now, I don't have a reference for this, but it's I heard it in the lectures, but things are so profound, you don't need a reference. So it's actually something I heard in the lecture by His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj. So regarding beauty. So he says, are you ready to hear? Something very profound. He says, we can't see our face. We've never seen our face, and we'll never see our face. What we're seeing every day is only a reflection of our face. Everyone is seeing our face, but we're only seeing a reflection of our face. So what does that mean? That means take a whole room of very beautiful supermodels. Very beautiful supermodels. So what does that mean? That means if there were no reflective surfaces or any mirrors, that each and every beautiful model will be envious of each and every one of each other's beauty. Why? Because you cannot see your face. So what does that indicate? Indicates? That clearly indicates that we're not this body. We're not this so-called beauty. And so basically to define the word Vishwarupa, Vishwa means universe or universe, and Rupa means beauty. So beauty means internal beauty. And what is the internal beauty enacted by Vishwarupa? It describes exactly what his name was. Universal love, beauty, that's the love. So it's described that Vishwarupa, he was related to both the demigods and the demons. He was related to everyone. Why? So aham bija pradapita. So this is a lesson we could take. Sometimes as devotees, we say, I'm the demigod and my enemies are the demons, right? So it doesn't matter. We all have our conceptions that I'm the good guy and all my enemies are the bad guys. So it doesn't matter. But the lesson we should take from Vishwarupa is that he was related to both the demigods and the demons. How? On his mother's side, I'm not sure. Either on his mother's side, he was related to the demigods, and on his father's side, he was related to the demons, or vice versa. I don't exactly remember. So it's described that he would openly offer benedictions to the demigods and secretly offer benedictions to the demons. And so this is a lesson we could take, that basically everyone is related to us. Why? Because Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmane Gavihasini Shune Chaiva Swapake Chapandita Samardarshina. If your family has different clothing, you don't say, oh, they have a different clothing, then I'm not their relative. No, inside the body is your relative. In much the same way, inside this body, we're related to everyone. Why? Because Mamaivam so Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatanaha Manashishtani Indirani Prakriti Stani Karshati. Mamaivamstra, we're all a part and parcel of Krishna, regardless of our stone dress. So what does that mean? Regardless of whether we see people as friends or enemies, everyone is related to us. So in this way, this is considered the mentality of one who's wise. So if we're old in age, but if we don't have this universal love, then we're considered childish. And because Vishwarupa had this universal mentality, this universal love, he was considered an elder despite being young in age. And so, Prabhupada also mentions about Shukadeva Goswami, why he was the speaker of the Bhagavatam, even though he was 16 years old. He was considered an elder as well. So in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 19, Verse 26, Prabhupada says in his purport, quote, a person is honored for his achievements and not for advanced age. A person can be older by experience and not by age. Sri Shukadeva Goswami, who was described herein as the son of Vyasadeva, was by his knowledge more experienced than all the sages present there, although he was only 16 years old. And so this is a universal principle that we should keep in mind, that wisdom isn't determined by age, how many years you've been practicing Krishna consciousness, how many shlokas you know, how many pujas you've done, how many rituals done. No, it's determined by your choices in life. And what's the main choice that keeps us in a lot of trouble? When we're not the masters of our tongue. When we're not the masters of our tongue, when we're the slaves, we're not meant to be the slaves of our tongue, but the masters of it. And this is the first lesson in the nectar of instruction. And so there are many examples regarding this of where people were the slaves of their tongue. Now, as far as this subject matter is concerned about beauty, there's a famous movie called Beauty and the Beast. I think it came out in 1991, I don't remember. But long story short, once upon a time, there was a handsome prince who lived in a palace. And so one cold winter night, just like it's cold here in Chicago, and somebody was supposed to give me a ride here, but they didn't answer their phone. And so basically, I had to get ready as fast as possible, and I don't have my bike. I had to leave. It's a long story. I don't have my bike at my home. Somebody drove me to my house yesterday, so my bike is here at the temple. And so basically, I was rushing this morning. I literally had to run here in the cold in this. I didn't even bring a coat. I was rushing. So on one cold winter night, a very hunchback, and from an external point of view, a very ugly old woman approached this prince, his palace, in a very cold winter night. And so she knocked on the door. He opened the door, and he was repulsed by her external appearance. And so she asked the prince, "My dear prince, I'm very old, and it's very cold outside. Can you give me shelter from the winter cold?" And so she offered him a very beautiful rose in exchange for his hospitality, but he refused her. He says, basically, he was like, "Yuck! Please get away from me, you old, ugly woman. I will never allow you in my..." Now, this is the lesson I got from this Beauty and the Beast pastime is that he had actually no reason to refuse her. Why? Because last week I was mentioning that she wasn't like a big black, muscular guy, who's potentially could, kill him and rob him, take him of all his riches. Just like a month ago, I was walking to the temple and I saw this huge, he was like 6 feet 8 inches tall, black guy. And he went to the gym every day. And I was thinking, the way I talk to devotees, I would never talk to him like that. He'll snap me like a twig. And so in this way, this prince, he had no reason to refuse this old woman. She wasn't black. She wasn't tall. She wasn't a man. And she was an old woman. So he had no reason to have any fear of her, but he still refused her. So in this way, she transformed into a very beautiful enchantress. Very beautiful. And she says, "My dear prince, because you have no love within your heart, I curse you to become a beast. And the only way you could break this curse is if you get a beautiful woman to fall in love with you in this particular form as a beast." So in this way, this pastime, there are actually similar pastimes in the Bhagavatam, which I'll get to. But basically, there's this movie. All these movies are basically based on the Bhagavatam and teachings in the Holy Bible. There's in the book of Hebrews of the Holy Bible, I don't remember which verse, but there's a nice verse that reminds me of this Beauty and Beast cartoon. It says, "Do not fail to show hospitality to strangers, because some have entertained angels without knowing it." And there's actually a passage in the Bhagavatam that I forgot to mention last week regarding a king named Rantidev. Long story short, Rantidev, he went on a long fast, and it came time for him to break the fast. So he had a nice prasadam plate, and he was about to dig in. And so when he was about to consume the food, it's described that a brahmana came to him, a sudra, a chandala, basically a first-class person, a second-class person, a lower-class person, and the lowest-class person. They all came to him seeking his help. They were all starving, basically on the verge of death. And so it's described that he was a king, and he gave them all of his food, whatever he had, even though he was a king. Now, the tendency is that when you're a king, you're selfish. You don't care about anybody but yourself. But it's described that Rantidev, even though he was on the verge of death himself, he gave all of his food away. He had fasted for many days, and without basically taking his food and water, he was going to die. But still, when a first-class person, a second-class person, a third-class person, and the lowest-class person came to him, he gave away all his food and water. So it's described that the demigods, they revealed themselves to Rantidev. They says, "My dear Rantidev, it was us who was the first-class person, the second-class person, the third-class person, and the lowest-class person, and you passed your test of humility." Because anyone can put on a show of humility, especially when people are watching. So in this pastime, it's described that Rantidev, basically the essence is anyone can show what they're made of when they're watching. The testament of our humility is to show what we're made of when nobody's watching. And actually, Krishna is always watching. Ishvara sarva bhutana hridesha arjuna tishati. And so sometimes we don't realize why we get a reaction for our activities, because we're so stupid in the final analysis that we think Christian, oh yes, if I don't say things publicly, I can remain free from my reaction. No, Christian sees everything. Whether you say things in your mind or in private, you'll get the reaction. And so this is the lesson we could take from Ranti Dev. He has such universal love for everyone that it's described that the demigods were angels in disguise. So this is a lesson we could take. So there's many pastimes in this regard, but I'll stick to a few more since time is running out. And so now Narada Muni, when we hear about the pastime of Narada Muni, most people kind of explain the time where Narada Muni was he was the son of a maidservant. But actually previous to that pastime, it's described that he was a beautiful demigod on a planet known as Gandharva Loka. Now, Gandharva Loka is described as the planet of the musicians. So it's described that Narada Muni's name on this planet was Upabarhana, and he was very proud of his beauty, that he always lusted after women, and that when he did kirtan for the demigods and for beautiful women. And in this way, he became cursed to become a beast, actually. It's described that he was devoid of all beauties. The sages were so disappointed at his pride that they cursed him to become the son of a maidservant, devoid of beauty is described. Why? Same story as Beauty and the Beast. So this is described in, let's see. Let's see. So this is described in the 7th Canto, chapter 15, verse 72, where it's described that Narada Muni, he was proud of his beauty. The sages cursed him to be devoid of all beauty, just to teach him humility. So there's also another story in this regard. In chapter 34 of the Krishna book, there's the story of a beautiful demigod named Vidyadhara. So Vidyadhara, one day it's described that Vidyadhara was flying in his transcendental airplane, and he saw a sage meditating. And this sage name was Angira. And so sometimes when we see in India, when yogis, swamis, babajis, they perform so many difficult austerities that they neglect to take a bath, comb their hair, so many difficult austerities, they're looking very rough. So it's described that Angira was not a very handsome looking sage. And so Vidyadhara is described, he was flying his celestial plane, and when he saw this ugly sage, because of his austerities, it's described that he was so proud that he started to laugh at him. And it's described that this sage cursed him through Krishna, by Krishna's arrangement. Not that the sage, Angira, was acting in vengeance, but it was Krishna's order that he inspired him to curse this demigod. And this demigod became a serpent. So one day, this serpent was, it's a long story, was swallowing Krishna's father, Nanda Maharaj. And so everyone, including Nanda Maharaj, was like, Krishna, save me, save me. So it's described that Krishna came and he touched his foot to the demigods. This serpent that was swallowing Nanda Maharaj, and this serpent transformed into a beautiful demigod. So Krishna asked this demigod, he says, my dear demigod, how is it that you attain the abominable body of a serpent? And so in this way, the demigod explained this story to Lord Krishna. He says, I was very proud of my beauty. And so in this way, the sage cursed me by your arrangement just to teach me humility. And so this is an example of how we could get ourselves in a lot of trouble when we're the slaves of our tongue and not the master. So I'll end with this story that I've shared many times before regarding taming the tongue. So once upon a time, a father wanted to teach his 18-year-old son, Jason, a lesson on taming the tongue. Why? Because all throughout Jason's life, he was always the most popular kid. He was a straight-A student, and he was the star athlete on his basketball team. Consequently, he became very proud by thinking, I can say anything to anyone and get away with it. But his father warned him. He says, my dear Jason, it doesn't matter how powerful we are or how powerful we think we are. We can always be humbled by Almighty God. But like most teenagers, Jason did not listen to his father, but circumstances would eventually humble him the hard way. Indeed, during Jason's freshman, sophomore, and junior year in high school, he always made the basketball team. But during his senior year, he got cut from the team. Why? Because his best friend, Eric, told him that the new basketball coach for his senior year was the father of one of the students he bullied all throughout high school. So the moral of the story is this: just as criminals who escape from prison will cause problems for all of human society, so when our bad qualities escape from us through our words and our actions, they cause problems for us and potentially for others. Just like we see in the pastime Beauty and the Beast, the pastime with Nardamuni, and the pastime with Vidyadhara. So the lesson is that how does one subdue criminals? With security guards. In much the same way, Yasyasti Bhattir Bhagavatiya Kinchana Sarvya Guna Yistatra Samasite Suraha. The Bhagavatam says a wise person subdues pride with humility, envy with appreciation, and vengeance with forgiveness. So there's a nice quote. It says, as long as a word remains unspoken, you are its master. Once you utter it, whether you utter it in your mind even, in private, you become the slave of it. So why? Because we're fully under the laws of nature. Krishna has 24 hours surveillance. Ishwara Sarva Bhuta, even within our heart. So this is a lesson we could take. And so the last point I'll mention is that it appeared that Vidyadhara, it appeared that maybe he practiced bhakti some of the time. He may even practice bhakti most of the time. But apparently he didn't practice bhakti all of the time. Because if he did, he wouldn't have got himself in such trouble. So the question is that how often should criminals be subdued? Some of the time, most of the time, or all of the time? Well, it's very simple. It's coming the new year, so we may see criminals. Oh, it's Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is next week. Then after that, Christmas. Oh, let the criminals out of jail to see their family for Christmas. No, criminals should be subdued, not some of the time, not most of the time, but all of the time. Similarly, how often should the Bhagavad Gita be practiced? Ye me matami dam nityam anutishtanti manavaha shradhavantu anusuyantu muchyante teapi karma bihi. Not some of the time, not most of the time, but nityam, all of the time. This is stated in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 31. How often should the Srimad-Bhagavatam be practiced? Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishiki. Not some of the time, not most of the time, but Nityam, all of the time. Finally, how often should the Chaitanya Charitamrita be practiced? Chaitanya Charitamrita Nitya Karapan Yaha Hoite Premananda Bhakti Tattva Gyan. Not some of the time, not most of the time, but Nitya, all of the time. So if we practice devotional service some of the time, then we'll keep ourselves out of trouble some of the time. If we practice devotional service most of the time, then we'll keep ourselves out of trouble most of the time. But if we practice devotional service all of the time, then we'll keep ourselves out of trouble all of the time. And so therefore, there's a nice quote by M. Scott Peck. Mother Krishna Arjuna knows, as we discussed last week. So there's a nice quote. I'll end with this. He says, quote, discipline is the basic set of tools we require to solve life's problem. Without discipline, we can solve nothing. With only some discipline, we can solve only some problems. With total discipline, we can solve all problems. So in this way, there's many things can be said. I tried to stick to the script, but sometimes, spur of the moment, it reminds me of other pastimes. So anyway, that's our topic for today. Any discussion with the brief few minutes we have? If not, yes? All right. I think we have 4 minutes left. Hurry up, Prabhu.
Yeah, the time is tight, so just one thing struck me from much early on in the class where you pointed out that one's destiny as such isn't determined by the action of others, but rather by Krishna, since he's ultimately controlling everything. So it may at times appear a little difficult to understand that concept because the actions of others can have quite an effect on one's life. So what would you say is a good reminder for oneself to understand that it's not the actions of others that are dictating the course of one's life?
Thank you, Mataji. Well, since I know more quotes than verses, I'll speak another quote, because I know most people probably can't absorb Bhakti Sastri, Bhakti Vaibhav, this and that, and expect to remember it. So I think quotes is a nice alternative. And so there's a nice quote that says, if somebody says something good about us, we feel good. If somebody says something bad about us, we feel bad. The question is, have we given the remote control of our happiness to someone else? So what happens when we become disturbed, when people neglect us, when people criticize us, insult us, spread rumors about us, spy on us? What are we saying? We're saying if we become disturbed, what are we saying? I have no control over my life. You have control over my life. You determine whether I'm happy or unhappy. So there's a nice other quote that says, if you don't control your mind, then someone else will. And so that's our choice. That's why in the chapter 14 of the Gita, Krishna says, treat honor and dishonor the same. Happiness and distress the same. Fame and infamy the same. Why? Because if our happiness is determined on being respected, what does that mean? If nobody ever respected you, you'll never be happy. And you'll always be, all those bad qualities will always come out. So sometimes it says, persons, places, things, and circumstances bring out the worst in us. But the reality is we have no control over that. So if our happiness is dependent on, things going our way, then we see that. And most people's have, despite speaking about the gopis, the sakis, the manjaris, and Radha Krishna, Radha Kun, and all this stuff, once we get off the Vyasa side, it's battlefield of Kurukshetra. And that's everywhere. Kali Yuga is Kali Yuga. So just practicing Hare Krishna is no exception to that. But that's the choice people can make. If your happiness is dependent on people respecting you, and it's not dependent on being Srinath Epi Sunichena, then you'll find yourself in a lot of trouble. So anyway, I'll end with this last quote about having Hiranyakashipu having the body of an adult in the mind of a child in that particular topic. So there's a nice passage from the Bible I forgot to quote, and I'll end with this. And this is very important in this regard. So this is from the Holy Bible. I'm quoting from two different places, but they say the same thing essentially in a little bit different way. So this is from the book of Hebrews, chapter 5, verse 12 through 14, and also from 1 Corinthians, chapter 3, verse 1 through 3. It says, quote, now listen up, quote, in fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. Brothers and sisters, I cannot address you as people who live by the Spirit, but as people who are still worldly, mere infants in God. I gave you milk, not solid food, for you were not yet ready for it. You are still not ready for it. You are still worldly, for since there's jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere humans? Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad-Bhagavatam ki, Jai. Thank you. Hare Krishna.